The book was better. It's the most common complaint in cinema history, but have you ever stopped to ask why? Why is it that a story that moves you into tears on the page often feels rushed, hollow, or just plain wrong when it hits the screen? We tend to think of storytelling as universal, but writing a novel and writing a screenplay are two completely different beasts. One is an exploration of the mind, and the other is a blueprint for action. Today, we're digging into the mechanics of why some stories resist adaptation, why short stories often make better movies than epics, and we're going to look at the perfect case study of this struggle, Dune. Welcome back. Today we're looking at the craft of writing from two very different angles. If you've ever tried to write, or even if you've just been a fan of movies, you know that the medium dictates the message. I recently sat down to discuss this exact topic, the friction between the page and the lens, with Richard Moon. He's an author and indie filmmaker. We looked at why the density of a novel often is its own worst enemy when it comes to Hollywood, and why the less is more approach of a short story might actually be the secret weapon for screenwriters. Whether you're a writer trying to choose your format or a viewer trying to understand why your favorite scene got cut, this breakdown is for you. Let's start by looking at the fundamental difference in how these two formats feel to write. When you're writing a novel, you have an unlimited budget. You can go inside a character's head, spend 3 pages describing a room, or jump back 1,000 years in a single sentence. It's a medium of total freedom. But screenwriting is about constraints. It's about rhythm, image, and time. I asked Richard about these specific tug-of-war items, enjoying the freedom of prose versus the structure of the script, and here is a great perspective on how those differences manifest.
Well, the question of which one I like more is really tough. I'm still doing both. I just, this year I completed a feature screenplay for a client and had a lot of fun writing it. I just wrote this little stunt script that had been sitting in my head forever it's ridiculous that I wrote it because I have no access to the IP it's based on. But that's why it's a stunt script. It's just a story I needed to get out of my head. And then I've also written a novella too at the same time. And I couldn't tell you which one I like more because they're both very different, and yet their differences are what makes them like individually enjoyable. So like screenplays.
Do you find the challenge of making the story actually work within the different formats just kind of part of the exhilaration of it?
Yeah, and I find it in a lot of ways a very similar process because it's figuring out what a character is, how the character is going to react to things, and also what words to use to describe that most efficiently. Or not efficiently, effectively.
That word, efficiency, is key. In a novel, you can be effective without being efficient. You can meander. In a screenplay, if a scene doesn't move the plot forward or reveal character, it gets cut out. You don't have the luxury of lingering unless the camera lingers with you. This brings us to the biggest problem with adaptations, density. A standard screenplay is roughly 100 to 120 pages. A standard novel can be 400, 600, or 1,000 pages. When you try to take a book that relies on complex internal monologues and world building and shove it into a 2-hour runtime, something breaks. You end up with a movie that feels like a checklist of plot points rather than a breathing story. To me, it feels like short story is more easily adaptable to the cinema than a full-on novel is, because in a full-on novel, you can get so complex, kind of like what you were saying. There's so much that you might try to jam pack into the movie that you might not be able to fit it within that hour and a half time frame. But the short story, it almost feels to me like it's more, it's not just that it can condense, but it can also be expanded just a little bit if needs to here and there to fit the format. And so I've always been a big proponent of the short film being more adaptable than the full-length novel. I don't know if you have any thoughts to that.
I tend to agree. I think a lot of adaptations that come from short stories show that off really well, that they're, because in terms of the complexity of thought you're trying to convey with the medium, a short story and a feature film are in very similar shapes, right? And I think a lot of the adaptations we've seen from, like I said, from short stories show that off. It's this tight little complete story that, you know, doesn't necessarily explore every single aspect of what's going on. And the contrary position is also, I think, has been shown off pretty well too, that sometimes you've seen those adaptations of books where they try to fit everything into the book, into the feature. Yeah. And it's like packed, solid, and there's no room to breathe.
Surprisingly, some of the best movies in cinema history, The Shawshank Redemption, Arrival, Minority Report, are based on short stories or novellas, not massive books. Why? Because a short story is usually built around one core idea or one specific emotional arc. It gives the screenwriter room to expand rather than force them to cut. It's the difference between decorating a large empty room versus trying to fit furniture from a mansion into a studio apartment. Hey folks, let me break in for just a second and send a shout out to my friends over at OBA or One Brilliant Arc. I'm not getting paid for this or anything at all. These are just really great people. They have been helping me edit my upcoming screenplay, A Good Man. Now, if you want to learn a little bit more about that, kind of get a sneak peek as to what A Good Man is about, head on over to their podcast or their YouTube video here. I'll put the links in the description below, and you can check them out. And if you need any editing services, give these guys a try. They're pretty darn awesome. Now back to our show.
I think an amazing example is the two big adaptations of Dune, which is a big book with a lot of ideas. And David Lynch, a tremendous filmmaker, tried to fit the entire book into that one movie. And it is just like, you're sitting there watching that movie, even if you love it, it's just like, we have no time to breathe. We got to just keep throwing the next thing at you because there's so much stuff to get by. Whereas then Denis Villeneuve, he looked at it and was like, okay, the first half of the story is, you know, the fall of the House of Atreides. And that's, you know, Paul's going from being a kid to everything falling apart for him. Let's just tell that story, you know? And then the second half of the book is Paul's rise to being, you know, a leader of the Fremen. Let's tell that story. And so he breaks it up and just focuses on those core stories in each movie. And that gives you that time to kind of like inhale the ideas that he's getting across and that the book was getting across. And I think it's, you know, a much better adaptation of that book.
Time to breathe. That is what screenwriting is ultimately about. Managing the audience's time and attention. Whether you're writing a script or adapting a book, you have to respect the rhythm of the visual medium. If you're a writer, don't be afraid to let your screenplays be screenplays. Don't try to make them novels, and if you're adapting, maybe look at that short story you wrote last year. It might just be the movie you've been waiting to make. Folks, this was only a tiny portion of the interview that I had with Richard Moon. If you'd like to catch the whole thing, run on over to my podcast, the Light-Minded Arts Podcast, and listen to the entire interview. It was an awesome, excellent interview, and you're going to get so much out of it. And don't forget to check out this seasoned storyteller's latest book, To Conquer Death. Check out the link in the description below, visit his website, or go to wherever you buy your books. If you enjoyed this dive into storytelling mechanics, hit that like button and subscribe for more breakdowns and helpful things to make you not just become a struggling artist, but a working creative. And let me know in the comments, what's one movie adaptation that you think actually improved on the book? Thanks for watching, and keep writing.